They tell you that when a woman turns 70, she becomes invisible. You become a fixture in the background of other people's lives, a soft shoulder to cry on, a source of Sunday dinners, a quiet shadow moving through the halls of a house that used to be filled with noise. They look at your gray hair, your lined face, and the slow, deliberate way you climb the front porch steps, and they assume your mind has slowed down right alongside your knees. They look at you and see a relic, a liability. What they don't see is that behind these tired eyes is 45 years of survival, 45 years of building a legacy brick by brick alongside a man who knew the value of $1 and the treacherous nature of the world. They think because my hands tremble slightly when I pour my morning tea, I lack the strength to tear their world apart. My name is Jolena Washington, and the day my daughter and her husband decided to throw me away like yesterday's newspaper, they made the most catastrophic miscalculation of their lives. But to understand the vengeance of a mother, you first have to understand her heartbreak. You have to go back to the day the foundation of my world cracked. It started with Marcus. My Marcus. We had been married for 44 years when his heart simply decided it had beaten enough. He was a good, strong man. He didn't wear tailored suits or flash expensive watches. For 30 years, he worked as a senior foreman at the municipal water plant, coming home smelling of chlorine and hard work. But what people didn't know about Marcus Sr. was that while his hands were calloused, his mind was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. He read the Wall Street Journal at the breakfast table every morning. He understood compound interest, market trends, and the quiet, unglamorous power of generational wealth. Together, we bought our house in a beautiful tree-lined neighborhood in Atlanta. We paid off the mortgage. We built a sanctuary. When he died, the silence he left behind in our home was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating fog that seeped into my bones. During the funeral, I was practically a ghost. I sat in the front pew of First Emmanuel Baptist Church, wrapped in black, my vision blurred by tears and the mild sedatives the doctor had prescribed to keep my heart from giving out. Through that fog, I watched my daughter, Maya. She sat beside me, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I loved Maya with a ferocity that only a mother knows, but looking at her that day, I felt a familiar ache that had nothing to do with my husband's casket. Maya had always been malleable, a beautiful, smart girl who shrank herself to fit into the molds created by the men in her life. And the man currently holding the mold was sitting right next to her, my son-in-law, Derek. Derek was everything Marcus was not. He was a walking billboard for a success he hadn't actually earned. He wore a sharp navy blue Italian suit that I knew for a fact was bought on credit. He wore a Rolex that looked a little too shiny, and he spoke in a relentless stream of Silicon Valley buzzwords mixed with the cadence of a prosperity gospel preacher. He called himself a serial entrepreneur. Marcus used to call him a serial liability. "I got you, Mama Joe," Derek whispered to me at the graveside, putting a heavy manicured hand on my shoulder. He smelled of expensive, aggressive cologne, cedar and ambition. Marcus was a king, but don't you worry about a single thing. Maya and I are stepping up. We're going to handle the estate, the bills, the transition. You just rest. Let us carry the burden. I was too shattered to recognize the gleam in his eye. I didn't hear a son-in-law offering comfort. I heard a man calculating the square footage of the ground we were standing on. The days following the funeral blurred into a montage of casseroles brought by neighbors, hushed phone calls, and the hollow ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I barely ate. I slept in the guest room because the scent of Marcus's shaving cream in our master bath was enough to send me to the floor in tears. I was vulnerable. I was grieving. I was exactly where they needed me to be. It was exactly 12 days after Marcus was put in the ground. A rainy Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was the color of a bruised plum. Derek and Maya came over unannounced. Maya went straight to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee, avoiding my gaze. Derek walked into the living room, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He laid it on Marcus's cherrywood coffee table and clicked the brass locks open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. "Mama Joe, how are you feeling today?" Derek asked, his voice dripping with that practiced, smooth sympathy. "Like half of me is missing, Derek," I whispered, clutching my shawl around my shoulders. "I know, Mama, I know it's a tragedy, but we have to make sure you're protected. Marcus would have wanted you protected." He pulled out a thick stack of papers, heavily flagged with little neon sticky notes. "I've been going through Pops's files. The probate courts in Georgia, they are ruthless, Mama Joe. If we don't get the estate consolidated, the state is going to come in and take a massive chunk of everything Marcus built in taxes and fees. Maya walked in, carrying a tray with 3 mugs of coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly, making the ceramic clatter against the wood. Derek is right, Mom. We consulted a financial planner. It's a lot of administrative red tape. We want to shield you from the stress. What is all this? I asked, looking at the dense legal jargon blurring before my tired eyes. The sedative I had taken that morning made the letters swim on the page. It's just standard insurance transitions and estate shielding, Derek said smoothly, handing me a heavy Mont Blanc pen. We're setting up a family trust structure, moving the title of the house into an LLC managed by the family so the government can't touch it. It's just a formality. You retain all rights, of course. We're just the administrators. Family trust, estate shielding. They sounded like responsible words. They sounded like things Marcus would read about in his journals. And standing there was my daughter, nodding along, her eyes wide and trusting. If I couldn't trust the child I carried in my womb for 9 months, the child Marcus and I had sacrificed everything for, who could I trust? Where do I sign? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. Right here by the yellow tabs, Mama Joe, just your standard signature. I signed my name 6 times. Jolena Washington. Jolena Washington. With every stroke of the pen, I was unknowingly signing away the walls that held my family's history. I was signing away the porch where Marcus proposed to me. I was signing away the kitchen where I taught Maya how to bake peach cobbler. I didn't sign an insurance transition. I signed a quitclaim deed. I legally surrendered the sole ownership of my $800,000 mortgage-free home directly into the hands of Derek's newly formed and wholly owned shell corporation. I didn't find out until 2 weeks later. I was in the garden, pruning the hydrangeas Marcus had planted for our 20th anniversary. The sun was shining, and for the first time in a month, the crushing weight on my chest felt a fraction lighter. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. It was Maya. Alone. She didn't come to the garden. She waited on the porch. When I walked up, basket of clippings in hand, I saw that she was crying. But it wasn't the soft, grieving tears of a daughter missing her father. It was the panicked, guilty weeping of a coward. Maya, baby, what's wrong? I dropped the basket, reaching for her. She flinched, stepping back. Mom, you have to pack. I froze. Pack? Pack for what? Is Derek taking us on a trip? Maya crossed her arms, hugging herself tight, refusing to look me in the eye. Derek's startup, the tech platform. The angel investors pulled out at the last minute. He was on the hook for the server costs and the developer contracts. If he defaulted, he would have faced criminal fraud charges, Mom. We had to liquidate some assets to provide the seed capital to save the company. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The buzzing of the bees in the hydrangeas sounded like roaring in my ears. Liquidate what assets, Maya? Your father and I don't have stock in his company. The house, Mom. The words tumbled out of her mouth like shattered glass. We sold the house. The closing was yesterday. The new owners, a development firm, they want to tear it down and build a duplex. They gave us 30 days to vacate, but Derek said it's better if we move you this weekend. I felt the blood drain from my face. I reached out and gripped the wooden railing of the porch to keep my legs from giving way. You sold my house? The house your father built? Maya, you have no right. My name is on the deed. You signed it over to the LLC, Mom, Maya cried, her voice rising in defensive hysteria. 2 weeks ago, you signed the papers. Derek said it was the only way to leverage the equity. It's an investment, Mom. When the app launches and goes public, Derek is going to buy you a mansion. He promised. The delusion in her voice was sickening. My daughter had been thoroughly brainwashed by a narcissist in a cheap suit, and she had sacrificed her own mother on the altar of his ego. Where am I supposed to go, Maya? I asked, my voice eerily calm, though a hurricane was raging inside my chest. Are you taking me into your apartment? Maya finally looked at me, and the shame in her eyes was absolute. Derek says the apartment is too small. He needs the guest room as his home office right now for the launch. But we found a place. It's called Whispering Pines. It's an assisted living facility on the east side. We paid for the first 3 months up front. It's nice, Mom. They have bingo on Tuesdays. Whispering Pines. I knew the place. It was a sterile, state-funded warehouse where families dumped their elderly when they became inconveniences. It smelled of ammonia and forgotten lives. You're putting me in a home, I stated. It wasn't a question. It's just temporary, Mom. Just until the return on investment comes through, Maya pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. I pulled away as if her skin was made of fire. Do not touch me. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made Maya take 3 steps back. 45 years of unconditional love, of packing her lunches, braiding her hair, wiping her tears, paying for her college. All of it erased. Swept away like dust on a porch. You have until Sunday to get my things, I told her, turning my back and walking into the house. Do not bring that man into my home again. If he steps foot on this property, I will shoot him with your father's hunting rifle, and I will let a jury of my peers decide if I was justified. I locked the heavy oak door behind me. I slid down the wood, sitting on the foyer floor, and I finally let the hurricane out. I wept until my throat was raw. I wept for the betrayal. I wept for my naivety. But most of all, I wept because my husband's legacy had been stolen by a con artist, and my own flesh and blood had handed him the keys. Sunday approached with the grim inevitability of an execution. I spent the days methodically packing my life into cardboard boxes. I didn't pack everything. I left the heavy furniture, the fine china, the things that tied me to a past that had just been violently erased. I only packed my clothes, my photos, and Marcus's personal effects. On Saturday night, the house was mostly empty, filled with the ghostly echoes of a dismantled life. I was in Marcus's study, a small room off the hallway lined with mahogany bookshelves. This was his sanctuary. It smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and his favorite cherrywood pipe tobacco. I was emptying the bottom drawer of his heavy oak desk, placing his old journals into a box when my hand brushed against something strange. The bottom of the drawer didn't sit flush. It was slightly elevated. I frowned, running my fingers along the back edge. There was a small groove in the wood. I pressed my thumb into it and pushed. With a soft click, a false bottom popped up. My heart hammered against my ribs. Marcus was a private man, but he didn't keep secrets from me. We shared everything, or so I thought. I carefully lifted the thin panel of wood. Beneath it lay a single heavy manila envelope, sealed with red wax. Written across the front in Marcus's unmistakable sharp handwriting was one line, for Jolena, only when the wolves come to the door. My breath hitched. My hands, trembling violently, broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter on his thick, personalized stationery, and a small silver key with a brass tag stamped with the number 814. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Joe, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the things I feared have come to pass. I write this to you with a heavy heart, because I know the pain you must be feeling right now. Not just from losing me, but from the betrayal I suspect has led you to open this drawer. I need you to forgive me, Joe. I kept a secret from you for the last 10 years of our marriage. I didn't keep it out of malice, but out of protection. You have a heart of gold, my love. You see the best in people, especially our Maya, but I am a man who sees the world for what it is. And the day Maya brought Derek into our home, I saw a wolf wearing sheep's clothing. I knew he would eventually drain her dry. I knew he would try to reach for whatever we had built. I couldn't stop her from marrying him. She was deaf to my warnings, but I could stop him from destroying your future. For 40 years, you thought my salary at the plant was all we had. You thought the small savings account in this house were our only safety net. My sweet girl, you underestimated my hustle. In the 1990s, I took a portion of our savings and invested it in a small tech manufacturing firm. It grew. I reinvested. It grew again. I quietly diversified into commercial real estate and venture capital, operating through a blind trust so that my name would never appear on public records. I didn't tell you, because if you knew, Maya would know. And if Maya knew, Derek would never stop until he had his hands on it. The key in this envelope belongs to Safety Deposit Box 814 at the First National Bank downtown. Inside, you will find the master ledger, the trust documents, and the contact information for my private attorney, Arthur Peterson. You are the sole beneficiary, Joe. You are, and have always been, a very wealthy woman. But there is one specific detail I arranged before my heart started failing me. A little insurance policy against our son-in-law's boundless greed. Go to the bank, Joe. Wipe your tears. Stand up straight. You are not a victim. You are a queen, and it is time to defend your kingdom. I love you, now and across eternity. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times. The words swam, solidified, and then etched themselves into my soul. The tears that had been burning my eyes completely dried up, replaced by a searing, ice-cold clarity. You are not a victim. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, before Maya and the moving truck were scheduled to arrive at noon, I called a cab. I didn't go to Whispering Pines. I went downtown. First National Bank was a fortress of marble and quiet money. I walked in wearing my Sunday church suit, my spine straight, the silver key burning a hole in my purse. I need to access box 814, I told the teller, sliding my ID across the polished counter. 10 minutes later, I was sitting alone in a private viewing room, the heavy metal box open on the table before me. Marcus hadn't exaggerated. The box was packed with legal documents, deeds, and certified bank statements. There were deeds to 3 commercial strip malls in Midtown. There were statements from offshore investment accounts showing numbers with so many zeros I had to count them with my finger to make sure I was reading them right. But it was the blue folder at the very bottom of the box that made my breath stop in my throat. The tab on the folder read, VTech Holdings. I opened it. Inside were articles of incorporation, capitalization tables, and equity distribution charts. I read the executive summary, my eyes scanning the dense corporate language until I found the plain truth hidden within the legalese. 10 years ago, Marcus had used his blind trust to become an angel investor in a promising tech incubator. Over the years, that incubator had spun out several companies. One of those companies was VTech, a software platform focused on logistical supply chains. It was the exact same company Derek had founded, the exact same company he was currently running into the ground. I flipped to the shareholder registry. Derek's name was listed as CEO, holding 20% of the founder's equity, but the majority shareholder, holding a massive 65% controlling interest through a proxy corporate entity called Legacy Horizon LLC, was Marcus Washington. And as of Marcus's death, as the sole beneficiary of his trust, that controlling interest now belonged entirely to me. I sat back in the leather chair, the silence of the vault pressing in on me. The irony was so profound, so intensely poetic, it almost felt like a physical blow. Derek had stolen my house. He had manipulated my grieving daughter, tossed me onto the street, and liquidated my sanctuary for seed capital to save a company that he thought he owned. He had no idea that the very company he was committing fraud to protect, the company he worshipped, was actually owned by the woman he had just thrown in the trash. He didn't own the platform. I did. He didn't have the power. I did. I looked at the documents. I could have called Arthur Peterson right then and there. I could have had my lawyers march into Derek's rented office on Monday morning, freeze his assets, fire him from his own company, and reclaim my house before the bulldozers arrived. I could have crushed him like a bug in a single day. But as I sat there in the cold, quiet vault, a different thought began to form. A dark, quiet ember of rage that Marcus's revelation had fanned into a roaring, controlled flame. If I crushed him now, he would just play the victim. Maya would cry, claiming I was ruining her husband's dreams out of spite. She would never learn. She would never see the monster she had married, and she would never understand the gravity of her betrayal. No, a quick death was too good for Derek, and it wasn't enough to save Maya's soul. I didn't want my house back. I wanted Derek to build his house of cards as high as it could possibly go. I wanted him to feel the intoxicating rush of success. I wanted him to think he had won, that he had gotten away with the perfect crime. And then, when he was standing at the very peak of his arrogance, looking down at the world, I was going to pull the floor out from under him. I picked up the phone provided in the private room and dialed the number on the business card Marcus had left for me. Law offices of Arthur Peterson, a professional voice answered. Mr. Peterson, this is Jolena Washington, Marcus Washington's wife. There was a pause, a shifting of papers, and then the lawyer's voice came on the line, warm and instantly attentive. Mrs. Washington, I have been waiting for your call. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Marcus was a brilliant man. How can I assist you today? Mr. Peterson, I say, as he said, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with the newfound weight of my power. I need to hire a private investigator, and I need you to quietly start buying up some corporate debt. Of course, ma'am. Whose debt are we buying? I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. My son-in-law's. I packed the documents back into the box, locked it, and walked out of the bank. The Atlanta sun was high and bright. I hailed a cab to go back to the empty house to meet the movers. I was going to let Maya pack my bags. I was going to let them drive me to Whispering Pines. I was going to sit in that cheap linoleum-floored room and play the part of the discarded, helpless widow perfectly. Let them think I was invisible. Let them think I was a relic. They were about to learn that the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices, who secretly owns the building. The air at Whispering Pines Assisted Living tasted like boiled cabbage, industrial bleach, and defeat. When Maya dropped me off that Sunday afternoon, she didn't come inside. She sat in the driver's seat of her leased Mercedes, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. She left the engine running, as if staying a minute too long might infect her with the poverty and obsolescence this building represented. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mom," she had said, not looking me in the eye. "Derek says the developer's check clears on Thursday. Once we get the seed money settled, I'll come bring you some proper groceries. Just hold on for a little bit, okay?" "I'll be right here, Maya," I replied smoothly, closing the car door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked up the concrete ramp into the facility, leaning slightly on my cane for effect. I stayed in that miserable, fluorescent-lit purgatory for exactly 6 days. I needed to stay just long enough to establish the narrative. I needed Derek to believe he had cleanly severed the dead weight. I sat in the vinyl chairs in the common room, sipping lukewarm tea, watching the other residents stare blankly at daytime soap operas. I played my part. I let the staff treat me like a fragile bird. But at night, in the privacy of my cramped twin-bed room, I didn't sleep. I read the documents from Safety Deposit Box 814. I studied Marcus's ledgers. I learned the language of my new empire. On the morning of the 7th day, I called a private car service. I packed my 2 suitcases, walked to the front desk, and signed myself out. "Mrs. Washington, your daughter hasn't authorized a discharge," the head nurse said, looking confused. I pulled a pair of dark sunglasses from my purse and slid them on. "My daughter doesn't authorize my breathing, sweetheart. Have a blessed day." I didn't move to a mansion, though Marcus's trust could have easily afforded me a penthouse in Buckhead. Instead, I directed the driver to a modest, well-kept brick apartment complex on the outskirts of Decatur. It was quiet, safe, and entirely unassuming. It was also, according to the thick stack of deeds in my leather tote bag, owned by a subsidiary of Marcus's holding company. I owned the whole block. I settled into a cozy ground-floor unit. I unpacked my few remaining dishes, set Marcus's framed photograph on the mantelpiece, and plugged in a secure, encrypted laptop provided by Arthur Peterson. This unassuming little living room was no longer a widow's retreat. It was a war room. Later that afternoon, Arthur Peterson arrived. He was a tall, distinguished older gentleman with silver hair and a sharp, tailored suit that whispered old money rather than screaming it like Derek's cheap Italian knockoffs. He brought a thick leather briefcase and a younger woman with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense bob cut. "Jolena, it is an honor to finally meet you in person," Arthur said, shaking my hand warmly. "Marcus spoke of you with a reverence I rarely see in my line of work." "Thank you, Arthur. And thank you for working on a Saturday." I gestured to the dining table. "Who is your associate?" "This is Chloe," Arthur introduced her. "She's the best private investigator in Atlanta, specializing in corporate forensic accounting. You asked me to look into Derek's finances. Chloe is the one who followed the digital paper trail." Chloe opened her laptop and placed a remarkably thick, red-tabbed folder on my table. "Mrs. Washington," she began, her voice crisp and efficient, "your son-in-law is not a businessman. He is an illusionist, and he is currently standing on a trap door with a frayed rope around his neck." I poured them both a cup of black coffee. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, they laid out the anatomy of Derek's financial rotting corpse. His startup, VTech, was bleeding cash at an astronomical rate. He was leasing a massive glass-walled office space downtown that he didn't need. He was paying for catered lunches, executive retreats, and PR firms to write fake articles about his genius. To fund this lifestyle, he had been taking on debt. Massive, crushing, high-interest debt. When the traditional banks cut him off, he moved to predatory institutional lenders, the kind of firms that charged extortionate interest rates and required personal guarantees. He's running a localized Ponzi scheme, Chloe explained, tapping a complex spreadsheet. He uses the money from new gullible investors to pay the minimum interest on the loans from the old investors. The money your daughter got from selling your house? It didn't go to server costs or developers. It went to paying off a bridge loan from a private equity firm that was threatening to seize his leased Mercedes and freeze his bank accounts. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. My house. My beautiful home. The porch where Marcus and I had watched thunderstorms roll in, traded away just to buy a pathetic con man a few more months of pretending to be rich. "Arthur," I said, folding my hands tightly in my lap. "I want to own him. Completely." Arthur nodded, pulling a legal pad toward him. "We can do that. It's entirely legal, albeit aggressive. Debt is just a commodity, Jolena. It can be bought, sold, and traded without the debtor's consent. Derek owes money to 3 regional banks and 2 private equity lenders. These institutions don't care about Derek. They care about mitigating their risk. Since his company is failing, his debt is classified as distressed. They will be thrilled to offload it." "How does it work?" I asked. "I will set up a new anonymous LLC. Let's call it Ironclad Capital," Arthur explained, a faint predatory smile touching his lips. "Ironclad will approach Derek's creditors. We will offer to buy his promissory notes, his loans, in full, perhaps at a slight premium to ensure a swift transaction. The banks get their money back and wash their hands of a bad client. And Ironclad Capital, which is you, Jolena, becomes the sole holder of Derek's debt." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Chloe chimed in, "you become his master. You hold the contracts. You hold the personal guarantees. When he misses a payment, and he will, you have the legal authority to call in the entire loan, seize his assets, garnish whatever accounts he has left, and force him into involuntary bankruptcy." I looked at Marcus's picture on the mantel. I thought about the smell of whispering pines. I thought about Maya, shrinking herself to appease a man who viewed her mother as a cash register. "Do it," I commanded softly. "Buy it all. Every single penny he owes. Use the liquid funds from the offshore accounts. I don't care what it costs. I want the paper in my hands." Arthur nodded, making a note. "Consider it done. We'll have the portfolios acquired by the end of the week. He won't even know the debt has been transferred until we decide to notify him." I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had plumbed the depths of Derek's depravity. But Chloe didn't close her laptop. She hesitated, looking at Arthur, who gave her a grim nod. "Mrs. Washington," Chloe said, her tone shifting from professional to deeply sympathetic. "There's more, and it directly concerns your daughter." She pulled out a separate, much thinner manila envelope and slid it across the table toward me. "In order to secure some of these high-risk loans, Derek needed collateral and co-signers," Chloe explained. "His credit score is practically non-existent, so he used Maya's." "Maya doesn't have collateral," I said, my brow furrowing. "She works part-time at an art gallery. She doesn't have the income to back his loans." "She doesn't," Chloe agreed. "But her signature is on a personal guarantor agreement for a $150,000 line of credit from a shadow lender out of Chicago." Chloe opened the envelope and produced a high-resolution scan of a contract. At the bottom, next to Derek's flamboyant scrawl, was Maya's signature. I stared at the ink. I know my daughter's handwriting. I taught her how to write her letters at the kitchen table. The M was too sharp. The loop on the Y was entirely wrong. "That is not her signature," I whispered, a sudden terrifying chill washing over me. "I didn't think so," Chloe said quietly. "We ran it through a handwriting analyst yesterday. It's a forgery. Derek forged his own wife's signature to secure $150,000. Under the law, until proven otherwise, Maya is jointly and severally liable for that money. If Derek defaults, the collectors won't just come for him. They will destroy Maya's credit, garnish her wages, and ruin her financial future for the next 20 years. I closed my eyes. The hurricane inside my chest, the one I had been carefully controlling, surged wildly. It was one thing to steal from an old woman. It was another entirely to put your own wife, the woman who defended you, who threw her mother out on the street for you, into the crosshairs of ruthless debt collectors. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "If there is, tell me now. Do not spare my feelings." Chloe swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. There is one more thing. And it's foul. She produced one final document. It was a property record from the state of Florida. 2 months ago, Derek flew down to Tallahassee to visit his parents. His father has early-stage Alzheimer's, and his mother is a retired school teacher living on a fixed pension. Their only real asset was their modest single-story retirement home. It was fully paid off. Was, I repeated, catching the past tense. Derek convinced them that his company was on the verge of an IPO, Chloe said, her voice laced with disgust. He told them he needed a short-term bridge loan, just for 90 days, and promised them a 500% return. He walked them into a bank and had them take out a reverse mortgage on their home, pulling out $100,000 in equity. He took the cash. He hasn't made a single payment on the interest. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Arthur, a man who had spent 40 years swimming with corporate sharks, looked visibly nauseated. Derek hadn't just sacrificed my legacy. He had cannibalized his own parents. He had put a frail old man with a fading mind and a mother who had likely worked 40 years in public schools on the fast track to homelessness. He was a black hole, consuming everything and everyone that loved him, leaving nothing but devastation in his wake. I slowly placed my hands flat on the wooden table. The tremors that had plagued my hands since Marcus's funeral were completely gone. My fingers were steady. Arthur, I said, the words ringing out like a judge handing down a death sentence. Yes, Jolena. I want you to buy the Chicago loan with Maya's forged signature. I want Ironclad Capital to hold that paper. Understood. And Arthur? Yes? I want you to find the bank in Florida that holds the reverse mortgage on his parents' house. I want you to buy that too. Pay whatever they ask. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Jolena, if you buy that debt, you essentially hold the deed to his parents' home. It's a toxic asset. I don't care, I said, my eyes locking onto his. If someone is going to hold the fate of those poor people in their hands, it is going to be me. Not some soulless bank. Me, as you wish. How long until the web is completely spun? I asked, looking back at the horrific spreadsheet of Derek's life. Give me 10 days, Arthur promised, snapping his briefcase shut. In 10 days, Ironclad Capital will own 90% of Derek's outstanding liabilities. He will be entirely, legally, and financially at your mercy. When they left, I sat alone in the quiet apartment. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the floor. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Maya's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up, sounding out of breath and annoyed. Mom, I told you I'd call you tomorrow. I'm really busy. Derek is preparing for a massive meeting with an investment conglomerate next week. They're talking about a buyout. It's happening, Mom. We're going to be rich. I smiled into the receiver, a cold, terrifying smile that no one was there to see. That's wonderful news, baby, I said, letting my voice sound weak and tired. I'm so happy for you both. I just wanted to tell you that I moved out of Whispering Pines. I found a low-income senior apartment in Decatur. It's small, but it's manageable. There was a brief pause on the line, a flicker of guilt, quickly extinguished by her husband's delusions of grandeur. Oh, okay. Well, that's good, Mom. Like I said, once the buyout goes through, we'll upgrade you. I have to go. Derek needs me to proofread his pitch deck. Love you. Love you too, Maya, I whispered. She hung up. An investment conglomerate, I thought, looking at the glowing screen of the encrypted laptop Arthur had left behind. A massive meeting next week. I opened the email Arthur had just forwarded me. It was a calendar invitation sent from a shell corporation to Derek's company, confirming a meeting for a total buyout and debt restructuring package. Derek thought he had finally found his golden goose. He thought he was walking into a boardroom to secure his fortune and escape the massive tidal wave of debt crashing behind him. He had no idea that the investment conglomerate he was so desperately trying to impress was me. He had no idea that he wasn't walking into a boardroom to be saved. He was walking into a slaughterhouse, and the butcher was wearing his mother-in-law's face. There is a specific kind of armor a woman must wear when she goes to war. It isn't made of Kevlar or steel. It is made of perfectly tailored wool, silk linings, and the cold, unyielding certainty of her own power. On the morning of the buyout meeting, I stood before the full-length mirror in my Decatur apartment and stripped away the frail, grieving widow. I packed away the oversized cardigans and the orthopedic shoes. I reached into the back of the closet, into a garment bag I hadn't opened in years, and pulled out an emerald green St. John knit suit Marcus had bought me in New York for our 30th anniversary. It still fit perfectly. I clasped a single strand of South Sea pearls around my neck, painted my lips a dark, unforgiving crimson, and slipped my feet into black leather pumps. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a 70-year-old liability. I saw Marcus Washington's apex predator. Arthur Peterson's firm occupied the entire 40th floor of a glass and steel monolith in downtown Atlanta. The boardroom was a cavern of power, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. A city Marcus had quietly bought pieces of while men like Derek were still learning to tie their shoelaces. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the room. I took the chair at the head of the table, facing the skyline, my back to the heavy oak double doors. Arthur sat to my right, organizing a stack of red-tabbed folders. To my left stood two men in sharp, inconspicuous gray suits, detectives from the Atlanta Police Department's white-collar crime division, friends of Arthur's who had been heavily briefed on the morning's itinerary. They waited quietly in the alcove near the wet bar, out of immediate sight. "They just arrived in the lobby, Jolena," Arthur said, glancing at his phone. "He brought his wife, and the assistant." "Perfect," I murmured, my eyes fixed on the tiny cars crawling along the highway far below. "Let him pitch." A few minutes later, the heavy oak doors swung open. I didn't turn around. I listened to the sound of Derek's expensive leather shoes clicking across the hardwood floor, the confident stride of a man who believed he was about to conquer the world. Behind him came the softer, hesitant steps of my daughter, Maya, and the sharp click-clack of his executive assistant's stilettos. "Mr. Peterson!" Derek boomed, his voice echoing with aggressive charisma. I could smell the cedar cologne from where I sat. "Derek Vance, a pleasure to finally meet you in person. This is my wife, Maya, and my director of operations, Sierra." "Mr. Vance?" Arthur replied smoothly, not rising from his seat. "Take a seat. We have much to discuss." I listened as Derek pulled out chairs. I could hear the rustle of papers as Sierra unpacked his presentation. "I have to say, Arthur, if I may call you Arthur, your principals at Ironclad Capital are making a brilliant move," Derek began, launching immediately into his practiced hyper-energetic pitch. "VTech is on the precipice of disrupting the entire logistical supply chain sector. We've hit a temporary cash flow bottleneck, sure, but the underlying IP is gold. The buyout structure your team proposed will clear our bridge loans and provide the runway we need to go global. Sierra, pass Mr. Peterson the Q3 projections." "I don't need the projections, Mr. Vance," Arthur said, his voice dropping 10 degrees. "The principals of Ironclad Capital have already reviewed your entire portfolio." Derek chuckled, a slick, nervous sound. "Well, then you know we're undervalued. I'm ready to sign the term sheet today. My team is ready for Europe. We're opening a satellite office in Paris next month. The future is incredibly bright." "The future," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scythe, "is entirely out of your hands, Derek." I grasped the armrests of the heavy leather chair and slowly swiveled around to face the room. The silence that followed was so profound, so absolute, it felt as though the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped. Maya was sitting to Derek's left. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, her mouth falling open. She dropped her designer purse. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling lipstick and keys onto the carpet. But she didn't even blink. Derek froze. His charismatic smile curdled into a mask of sheer, unadulterated shock. His brain struggled to process the image before him. The frail woman he had thrown into a discount nursing home just weeks ago was sitting at the head of a billionaire's boardroom, radiating an icy, sovereign authority. "Mom?" Maya whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. What are you doing here? Did Derek invite you?" Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He forced a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Mama Joe? What is this? Arthur, is this some kind of joke? Did my wife set this up?" I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the polished mahogany. I didn't smile. "Hello, Derek. Please keep pitching. I was fascinated by the part where you go to Paris." "I don't understand," Derek stammered, looking frantically between me and Arthur. "Yuki." "Your Ironclad Capital?" "Ironclad Capital is a subsidiary," I explained, my voice smooth and rhythmic. "It was incorporated 10 days ago for one specific, highly targeted purpose: To buy you. I reached over and opened the first red-tabbed folder. I slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the smooth wood until it stopped right in front of him. This is the $300,000 high-yield promissory note you signed with Apex Lending last month, I said. And underneath it is the $250,000 line of credit from the First Bank of Georgia. And below that are the 7 different microloans you took out to pay for your leased Mercedes, this rented office space, and the fake PR articles you bought to make yourself look like a CEO. Derek stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. His chest began to heave. You bought my debt? Every last cent of it, I confirmed. And since you missed your consolidated payment last Friday, because you used your last bit of liquidity to buy custom suits for this very meeting, I am officially calling in the loans. All of them. Effective immediately, you are in default. I am seizing VTech's remaining assets, freezing your bank accounts, and initiating involuntary bankruptcy proceedings against you personally. Maya grabbed Derek's arm, her face pale, tears welling in her eyes. Derek, what is she talking about? What debt? You said the angel investors just needed a little more time. You said selling Mom's house covered the server costs. Selling my house? I interrupted, shifting my gaze to my daughter. My heart ached for the devastation on her face, but a surgeon cannot flinch while cutting out a tumor. Did not pay for server costs, Maya. It paid off a loan shark who was threatening to break his legs. Derek, tell me she's lying, Maya pleaded, shaking his arm. Derek ignored her. The panic in his eyes was morphing into cornered, desperate anger. He slammed his hands on the table, glaring at me. You think you're smart, old woman? You think buying my debt gives you my company? VTech's intellectual property is mine. The equity is mine. You can bankrupt me, but I am still the majority voting founder. I'll tie this up in litigation for 10 years. Arthur cleared his throat and slid a blue folder across the table. It was the folder from Safety Deposit Box 814. Actually, Mr. Vance, Arthur said mildly, you own 20% of VTech. The remaining 15% is distributed among early employees, but the controlling 65% of the voting shares is held by an early angel entity known as Legacy Horizon LLC. Derek sneered. I know who Legacy Horizon is. They're a blind trust. They never interfere with operations. They don't, I agreed. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the blue folder. But the sole beneficiary and active manager of Legacy Horizon LLC is me. My husband Marcus funded your pathetic little company 10 years ago. You don't own the equity, Derek. I own the equity. You work for me. And as the majority shareholder, I held an emergency board meeting this morning at 8 a.m. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You're fired. Derek staggered back a step, knocking his chair over. The color drained completely from his face, leaving a sickly grayish pallor. His empire, the illusion he had sacrificed his own humanity to build, was evaporating before his eyes. He had nothing. No company, no money, just a mountain of debt held by the woman he had treated like garbage. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'll file for personal protection. I'll declare Chapter 7. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. Oh, I'm not looking for blood, Derek, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I'm looking for justice. I opened the final folder. I pulled out the high-resolution scan of the Chicago loan and the Florida property deed. Maya, I said gently, looking at my daughter. Look at me, baby. Maya slowly lifted her head. She looked completely broken. Derek took out a $150,000 loan from a shadow lender in Chicago. He needed a guarantor with a clean credit history. I slid the paper toward her. Did you sign this, Maya? Maya looked at the paper, her eyes tracing the signature at the bottom. She shook her head slowly. No, I've never seen this before. I didn't think so, I said softly. I looked back at Derek. Forgery is a felony, Derek, but that's not even the worst of it. I threw the Florida deed onto the center of the table. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the reverse mortgage? Did you really think you could scam your own elderly parents out of their retirement home, leave them to face foreclosure, and I wouldn't find the paper trail? Maya gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. She looked at Derek as if looking at a monster who had just shed its human skin. You stole from your own parents? To pay for what? The caterers? The suits? Shut up, Maya, Derek snapped, his veneer completely shattered. He looked around the room, frantic, realizing the walls had closed in. He looked at Arthur, then at me, and finally, he turned to his young, beautiful assistant, Sierra, who had been standing quietly by the door the entire time. "Sierra," Derek barked, his voice frantic. "Get my briefcase. We're leaving. Call the airline. Bump the Paris tickets up to tonight. We still have the cash in the offshore Cayman account. We're leaving now." Maya let out a ragged sob. "Paris tickets? We? Derek, who is we?" Derek didn't even look at his wife. He was staring at the assistant, his escape plan, his young prize. "Sierra, move!" Sierra didn't move toward the briefcase. Instead, she calmly reached up, took off her stylish non-prescription glasses, and folded them into the pocket of her blazer. Her demeanor shifted instantly from a starry-eyed, subservient assistant to something cold, sharp, and highly trained. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Vance," Sierra said, her voice dropping its high, breathy pitch, settling into a firm, authoritative tone. Derek blinked, disoriented. What are you talking about? I pay you." "Actually," Sierra said, reaching into her inner jacket pocket and pulling out a leather wallet. She flipped it open and tossed it onto the mahogany table. A gold private investigator's badge gleamed under the recessed lighting. "Mrs. Washington pays me. My name is Chloe, and I've been building a criminal dossier on you for the last 6 weeks." Derek stared at the badge, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Chloe turned to me and gave a curt nod. Mrs. Washington was correct. When I accessed his private encrypted server this morning, I found the wire transfer receipts. He was attempting to move the last $200,000 of defrauded investor capital into a Cayman Islands account to flee the country tonight. He bought 2 tickets to Paris, I added, looking at Maya, making sure she absorbed the full, brutal reality of the man she had chosen. One for himself and one for the girl he thought was his mistress. He was going to leave you here, Maya, holding the bag for the forged $150,000 loan. He was going to let you go to prison for his crimes. Maya collapsed to her knees, burying her face in her hands, her wails echoing against the glass walls of the boardroom. It was the sound of a woman's entire reality being torn apart atom by atom. Derek backed away from the table, his hands raised, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors. This is entrapment. You set me up. You crazy old—" He turned to run. That was when the 2 men in the gray suits stepped out from the alcove. "Derek Vance," the lead detective said, stepping into his path and flashing a gold APD badge. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony forgery." Before Derek could utter another word, the detective spun him around, slammed him against the polished mahogany table, and forcefully pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click-clack of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had heard since Marcus died. Derek struggled, his custom suit bunching up around his shoulders, his face pressed against the wood. "Maya! Maya, call a lawyer! Don't let them do this! Maya!" Maya didn't move. She stayed on the floor, weeping, refusing to even look at the man who had hollowed out her life. The detectives pulled Derek up and hauled him toward the doors. As he was dragged past me, he locked eyes with me. There was no arrogance left. There was only the stark, terrified realization of a man who had kicked a sleeping dragon and was now being consumed by the fire. "You're a monster," he hissed at me, his voice trembling. I didn't blink. I smoothed the emerald wool of my skirt, stood up from the head of the table, and looked down at him. "No, Derek," I said softly, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am a mother, and you should have let me keep my house." The doors swung shut behind them. The room fell silent, save for the ragged, heartbroken sobbing of my daughter on the floor. I looked down at her, stripped of her pride, her illusions, and her husband. The empire of lies was dead. But as I looked at her, I knew the hardest part of my plan had just begun. Breaking Derek was easy. Rebuilding Maya from the shattered pieces he left behind, that was going to require a completely different kind of ruthlessness. When a house of cards collapses, it doesn't make a sound. It just leaves a mess that someone else has to sweep up. Derek's arrest made the evening news. Local Tech CEO indicted in multi-million-dollar fraud ring. They showed footage of him being escorted out of the glass and steel building, his tailored Italian suit wrinkled, his hands cuffed behind his back, trying to hide his face from the camera flashes. He looked small. He looked exactly like the pathetic, hollow man Marcus had always known him to be. For Maya, the descent into hell was instantaneous and absolute. The illusion of her glamorous life was violently stripped away within 48 hours. The bank seized the leased Mercedes. The landlord of their luxury downtown penthouse, having not been paid in 3 months, changed the locks and issued an immediate eviction notice. Her credit cards were frozen. Her phone rang incessantly, not with invitations to charity galas or gallery openings, but with the aggressive, threatening voices of debt collectors. And looming over it all was the forged $150,000 loan from Chicago. Even though Derek was behind bars, the law dictates a brutal arithmetic. Her name was on the paper, so the hounds were legally allowed to hunt her. Maya didn't know that Ironclad Capital, which was me, held that note. She thought she was being hunted by ruthless mobsters in cheap suits. She lasted 3 days on her friends' couches. The women who used to drink mimosas with her on Sunday mornings suddenly stopped returning her texts. Poverty is a contagious disease in those circles, and no one wanted to catch it. On the 4th night, it rained. It was a cold, driving Atlanta rain that chilled you right down to the marrow. I was sitting in my armchair in the Decatur apartment reading a book when the knock came. It was weak, hesitant. I opened the door. Maya stood under the flickering amber porch light. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her skull. She wasn't carrying Louis Vuitton luggage. She had a single damp cardboard box containing a few sweaters, a pair of jeans, and her toothbrush. The expensive makeup had washed away, leaving only dark, bruised circles under her eyes. She looked like a lost, terrified little girl. "Mom," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I have nowhere else to go." My heart, the traitorous muscle of a mother, screamed at me to pull her inside, to wrap her in a warm blanket, to brew tea and tell her everything was going to be okay. I wanted to tell her she was a millionaire by proxy, that the debt was handled, that the nightmare was over. But I looked at her, and I remembered the coldness in her voice when she told me she had sold my sanctuary. I remembered the ease with which she had traded my dignity for Derek's approval. A mother's love isn't always a warm blanket. Sometimes it has to be a crucible. If I rescued her now, she would only learn that there is always a safety net. She would never learn to stand on her own 2 feet. I stepped aside, leaving the door open. "Come in out of the rain, Maya." She stepped inside, shivering, dripping water onto the linoleum. She looked around the modest apartment, the cheap furniture, the cramped walls. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For the house. For Derek. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said quietly, handing her a towel from the bathroom. "But apologies don't pay off $150,000 in debt, Maya. Apologies don't buy groceries." She buried her face in the towel, sobbing. "I don't have anything. They took it all. My gallery fired me because the fraud investigation made the local papers. I have $5 in my checking account." "You have your life," I told her, my voice firm, devoid of pity. "You have a functioning body. You have a roof over your head tonight. That is more than you gave me when you put me in Whispering Pines." She flinched as if I had struck her. The shame radiating from her was palpable. "You can stay here," I continued, crossing my arms. "But this is not a hotel, and I am not your maid. You will pull your weight. You will pay for your half of the utilities, and you will buy your own food. If you are going to live under my roof, you are going to work." I will. I promise," she stammered, wiping her nose. "I'll apply to other galleries. Maybe museums. I have a degree in art history. No gallery is going to hire the wife of a convicted fraudster right now," I cut her off. "You need cash, and you need it immediately." I spoke to a friend of mine. He manages the maintenance contracts for several commercial buildings downtown. He had a sudden vacancy on the night crew. Maya stared at me, the reality slowly piercing through her exhaustion. "The night crew? You mean janitorial work?" "I mean pushing a mop, emptying trash cans, and scrubbing toilets from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I said, my gaze unwavering. "It pays minimum wage, but they don't do background checks, and they pay every Friday. You start tomorrow." For a split second, I saw the ghost of the old Maya, the entitlement, the recoil at the idea of manual labor. But the ghost vanished as quickly as it appeared, crushed by the weight of her absolute destitution. She swallowed her pride, the hardest pill she had ever taken. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Mom." The building she was assigned to clean was a 20-story corporate plaza in Midtown. What Maya didn't know, what no one but Arthur Peterson and I knew, was that the plaza was owned entirely by one of Marcus's real estate holding companies. I was her landlord, her creditor, and now her ultimate employer. I received weekly reports from the property manager on her performance. The first few weeks nearly broke her. Maya would leave my apartment at 9 p.m. wearing a shapeless blue uniform that swallowed her figure. She would ride the public bus for 45 minutes, sit in a break room smelling of stale coffee, and then push a heavy yellow cart loaded with industrial chemicals for 8 solid hours. She came home at dawn, dragging her feet, her face gray with exhaustion. She would collapse into the small guest bed and sleep like a stone until the late afternoon. I watched the physical toll it took on her. The harsh cleaning chemicals dried out her skin. The heavy lifting made her back ache. But the most profound change was in her hands. The soft, manicured fingers that had only ever held champagne flutes and designer bags began to crack. Blisters formed, popped, and hardened into calluses. One morning, about 2 months into her new life, I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when she walked in. She had just finished a shift. She went to the sink, turning on the warm water, wincing as the soap stung the raw patches on her knuckles. I watched her dry her hands. They looked like Marcus's hands used to look after a long week at the water plant. They looked like honest hands. She sat down across from me and pulled a small, crumpled envelope from her pocket. She slid it across the table. "What is this?" I asked. "My half of the electricity bill and $40 for groceries," she said, her voice rough with fatigue. "I know it's not much, Mom, but I picked up an extra shift covering for one of the other girls who got sick." I looked at the crumpled bills. It was the most beautiful money I had ever seen. "Thank you, Maya," I said softly. She didn't get up to go to bed. She sat there, staring into her empty mug. "I cleaned the 14th floor last night," she said quietly. "It's a law firm. I was emptying the trash in one of the corner offices. The lawyer had pictures of his family on the desk. His wife, his kids. They looked so happy." She took a shaky breath. "I used to look at people who cleaned my office building and I didn't even see them, Mom. They were just ghosts in blue shirts. But last night, I accidentally bumped into a framed photo and knocked it over. The lawyer had stayed late. He came out of the bathroom, saw me holding the frame, and he yelled at me. He looked at me like I was garbage, like I was stupid, like I was nothing." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her lashes and cutting tracks down her tired face. "And standing there, apologizing to a man who wouldn't even look me in the eye. I realized something," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I realized that was exactly how I treated you. When I sold the house. When I told you to pack your bags for Whispering Pines. I looked at you, my own mother, the woman who gave me life, and I treated you like you were nothing but an inconvenience in my way." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, holding it tight with her calloused, blistered fingers. "I am so sorry, Mom. I am so, so sorry. I deserve everything that is happening to me. I deserve the debt. I deserve the humiliation. If I have to scrub toilets for the rest of my life to pay for what I did to you in Dad's memory, I will do it. Just please tell me you can forgive me someday." I looked at my daughter. The entitlement was gone. The vanity was burned away. The fire of the crucible had done its work, melting away the impurities and leaving behind the strong, resilient steel I always knew was buried inside her. I squeezed her hand back. "You are my daughter, Maya. You have always had my forgiveness. But forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just gives you the strength to build a better future." "I want to build a better future," she whispered. "I want to be someone Dad would be proud of." "Oh, baby girl," I thought, fighting back my own tears. If you only knew. The time was approaching. The transformation was nearly complete. But there was one final phantom Maya needed to face. She needed to understand the true architect of her salvation. It happened 3 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. Maya had the weekend off. I had purposely brought 2 heavy cardboard boxes from the storage unit and left them in the middle of the living room floor. "Maya," I called out from the kitchen, wiping down the counters. "Could you do me a favor? I brought some of your father's old books and files from storage. I need to sort out what to donate to the library. Could you go through that box on the left?" "Sure, Mom," she called back. I stood by the doorway, out of sight, listening. I heard the rustle of cardboard. I heard the soft thud of heavy textbooks being stacked on the floor. And then I heard a sharp intake of breath. The rustling stopped entirely. Inside that box, tucked securely between the pages of Marcus's favorite leather-bound encyclopedia, I had placed the heavy manila envelope with the red wax seal, the letter Marcus had left in the false bottom of his desk. I waited in the silence. Minutes ticked by. I could hear the faint sound of paper trembling. "Mom?" Maya's voice was a choked, fragile whisper. I walked into the living room. Maya was sitting on the floor, surrounded by dusty books. The letter was in her hands. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a shock so profound it seemed to steal the breath from her lungs. "You found your father's letter," I said softly, standing over her. Maya looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, the paper shaking violently in her grip. He knew? Dad knew about the money? He knew Derek was a fraud? "Your father saw the world very clearly, Maya." She looked back down at the letter, reading the words aloud, her voice breaking on every syllable. "I didn't tell you, because if you knew, Maya would know. And if Maya knew, Derek would never stop until he had his hands on it." She choked on a sob, pressing her hand to her mouth. "He hid his entire fortune, his whole life's work, to protect it from my husband, to protect it from me. To protect it for you, Maya," I corrected her gently. She shook her head wildly, reading the next paragraph, the one that Marcus had written with the heavy prophetic hand of a father who understood the painful necessity of tough love. "If the wolves come to the door, Joe, let them inside. Let Derek take what he thinks he can take. Let Maya fall. I know it will break your heart to watch her suffer, but I know our daughter. She has been blinded by the illusion of easy wealth. She needs to be broken to be remade. She needs to hit the absolute bottom of the well before she can look up and see the light. Do not save her until she learns how to save herself." Maya dropped the letter. She pulled her knees to her chest and wept with an intensity that shook her entire body. It wasn't the weeping of a victim anymore. It was the devastating, beautiful mourning of a woman realizing the monumental scale of her parents' love. She realized that the brutal nights pushing the mop, the blistering chemicals, the sheer terror of the debt collectors, it wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue operation. Her father had known the fire would burn her, but he also knew it was the only way to burn off the parasite that was destroying her soul. He had set the trap and I had sprung it, not out of vengeance, but out of a desperate, unwavering love. I knelt down on the floor next to her. For the first time in months, I didn't hold back. I wrapped my arms around my daughter and pulled her tight against my chest. She buried her face in my shoulder, clinging to my sweater with her calloused, honest hands. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Dad knew. He knew how awful I was going to be, and he loved me enough to stop me from ruining everything. He loved you more than life itself, Maya," I whispered into her hair, rocking her back and forth on the living room floor, just like I did when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. "And so do I." "The debt, Mom," she sobbed, looking up at me with terrified eyes. "The $150,000. I can't pay it. I've been trying so hard, but on minimum wage, the interest. They're going to put me in jail like Derek. I ruined the legacy Dad built." I brushed the tears from her cheeks with my thumbs. I looked into her eyes, seeing the humility, the strength, and the raw, unvarnished truth of the woman she had finally become. The crucible had done its work. The impurities were gone. "No, baby," I said, a slow, gentle smile spreading across my face. "You didn't ruin the legacy, and nobody is going to put you in jail." Maya sniffled, looking confused. "But the Chicago lenders, the debt collectors." "There are no Chicago lenders, Maya," I said, my voice dropping to a low, comforting hum. "There are no debt collectors coming for you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crisp, legally binding promissory note, the forged document that had been the sword of Damocles hanging over her head for the past year. "Ironclad Capital bought your debt the week Derek kicked me out of the house," I told her, placing the document in her trembling hands. "I am your creditor, Maya. I own the debt." Maya stared at the paper, and then at me, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of the revelation. The stage was set for the final reckoning. It was time to find out if the woman holding that paper was ready to inherit an empire. The silence in the living room was absolute, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the window panes. Maya stared at the promissory note in her blistered, calloused hands. The document that had terrorized her sleep, the phantom debt that had driven her to scrub floors in the dead of night, bore the unmistakable watermark of ironclad capital. And looking back at her, with eyes as deep and unwavering as the ocean, was the CEO of that very company, her mother. You own my debt?" Maya whispered, the words catching in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the colossal architecture of the strategy I had deployed. "The Chicago lenders. That was you? You've held this over me this entire time?" I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. A mother's love cannot afford to be fragile when the stakes are her child's soul. "I bought it the week Derek sold my house," I said evenly. "When Arthur Peterson discovered the forgery, I knew that if that paper remained in the hands of a shadow bank, they would destroy you. They would garnish your wages, ruin your credit, and hound you to the ends of the earth. So I bought it. I became your creditor to ensure that no one else could ever hold a whip over your back." Maya's breath hitched. She looked at the cheap, cramped walls of my Decatur apartment, then down at her rough hands, and finally back at me. "But you let me suffer," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization, full of awe and a devastating kind of wonder. "You let me work the night shifts. You let me think I was going to prison. You watched me come home with bleeding hands and you didn't say a word." "If I had torn this paper up the day you arrived on my doorstep," I said, leaning closer, "what would you have learned, Maya? You would have learned that Derek was right. You would have learned that there is always a magical bailout, that you can throw away your family, your dignity, and your legacy, and someone will always be there to write a check and clean up your mess. You would have remained the woman who signed away her mother's home. I couldn't let you stay that woman. Your father wouldn't let you stay that woman." She looked down at the letter from Marcus, resting on the floor beside her. The ink seemed to glow in the dim light. "She needs to be broken to be remade." "I needed you to feel the weight of $1 earned with your own sweat," I continued, my voice softening, filling with the profound ache of the past year. "I needed you to look the invisible people in the eye and realize you are no better than they are. I needed you to find your own spine, Maya, because the empire your father built cannot be run by a woman without a spine. The wolves would eat you alive." Maya closed her eyes, and a fresh wave of tears fell, but this time they were silent. They were the tears of a profound, ego-shattering baptism. She gently placed the promissory note on the coffee table, next to her father's letter. "I understand," she whispered. "I truly do. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on you." I reached out and cupped her face, wiping the dampness from her cheeks. "I could never give up on you, baby girl. But our journey isn't quite finished." I stood up and walked over to the small wooden desk in the corner of the room. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a sleek black leather portfolio. I brought it back to the coffee table and laid it down between us. "Your father left a legacy, Maya, a massive one. Legacy Horizon LLC, the commercial properties, the offshore accounts. It is a generational wealth engine. But wealth is a magnifying glass. If you are a fool, it makes you a colossal fool. If you are a tyrant, it makes you a monster. And if you are wise, it gives you the power to change the world." I opened the portfolio. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. "This is the final lesson," I said, my tone shifting back to the commanding matriarch she had seen in the boardroom. "And the choice is entirely yours." I slid the first piece of paper toward her. It was a certified cashier's check, drawn from the First National Bank, made out to Maya Vance. The amount was $500,000. Maya gasped, her hands instinctively pulling back as if the paper were hot. "Mom, what is this?" "This is your exit," I explained coldly. "It is $500,000, free and clear. If you take this check, I will shred the $150,000 promissory note right now. You will be completely debt-free, with enough seed money to move to New York, Los Angeles, or anywhere else you want. You can start a gallery. You can buy a new Mercedes. You can walk out that door and never have to push a mop or scrub a floor ever again." Maya stared at the string of zeros. For a woman who had been living on $40 of grocery money a week, the check was a blinding, intoxicating light. It was the easy way out. It was everything the old Maya had ever dreamed of. "But," I added, my voice heavy with finality, "if you take that check, you walk away from this family's legacy. You will have no part in Legacy Horizon. You will have no seat at the table. You will take your buyout, and you will go live your life entirely separate from mine. You will be free, but you will be alone." Maya swallowed hard, her eyes darting from the check to my face. I then slid the second piece of paper across the table. It was a thick, multi-page legal document with Arthur Peterson's letterhead at the top. "This," I said, tapping the heavy parchment, "is a 10-year repayment contract. If you sign this, you are formally acknowledging the $150,000 debt. You agree to pay it back to Ironclad Capital, with interest, over the next decade." Maya looked at the dense legal text. "Pay it back? How?" "By working for me," I said. "You will quit the night shift. Tomorrow morning, you will put on a suit, and you will walk into Arthur Peterson's office. You will start at the absolute bottom of Legacy Horizon LLC as a junior analyst. You will learn forensic accounting. You will learn property management. You will learn how to read a capitalization table, how to negotiate a commercial lease, and how to spot a predator in a tailored suit from a mile away." I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto hers. "It will be the hardest 10 years of your life. Arthur will not coddle you. I will not coddle you. You will earn a modest salary, and a strict percentage of that salary will be automatically garnished to pay down your debt. You will not be rich. You will be an employee. But at the end of those 10 years, when the debt is cleared, you will step up as the co-director of the entire trust. You will be my partner, and when I am gone, you will be the queen of the empire." The rain continued to beat against the window. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked off the heavy seconds. "The check or the contract, Maya?" I said softly. "The easy illusion or the hard truth? Choose who you want to be." I watched her face, holding my breath. This was the moment. The crucible had melted the iron. Now it was time to see what shape it would take as it cooled. Maya looked at the $500,000 check. Her calloused fingers reached out, hovering over the crisp paper. I saw a flicker of hesitation, a ghost of the vanity that Derek had so easily exploited. It would be so easy. Grab the money, run away from the shame, run away from the blisters, and buy a new life. She picked up the check. She held it in both hands, looking at the zeros. Then she looked up at me. The vulnerability in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, blazing clarity that looked exactly like Marcus when he was negotiating a union contract. Without breaking eye contact, Maya brought her hands together. Beep! The sound of the tearing paper was louder than thunder. She tore the $500,000 check in half. Then she put the pieces together and tore them again, letting the confetti of her easy escape flutter down onto the cheap living room rug. She didn't say a word. She reached across the table, picked up my Mont Blanc pen, and pulled the 10-year contract toward her. With a steady, deliberate hand, she flipped to the last page. She didn't forge a signature. She didn't write the loopy, careless letters of a naive girl. She signed her name with sharp, forceful strokes. Maya Washington. She had dropped Derek's last name. She clicked the pen shut and pushed the signed contract across the table toward me. "I don't want the money, Mom," she said, her voice ringing with a profound, unshakable dignity. "I want my mother, and I want to earn the right to carry Dad's name." The dam broke. The iron armor I had worn for a year finally cracked, and I wept. I stood up, pulled my daughter up from the floor, and held her as tightly as I possibly could. We stood there in the quiet apartment, two women who had survived the fire, holding on to each other, mourning the past and fiercely claiming the future. "You already have, baby," I whispered. "You already have." 6 months later, the air in Atlanta was crisp and sweet with the smell of autumn leaves. A lot had changed since the night in the apartment. True to her word, Maya had walked into Arthur Peterson's office the following Monday. She traded her janitorial uniform for sharp, conservative business wear. She started at the bottom, fetching coffee, organizing files, and sitting in the back of boardrooms taking meticulous notes. Arthur was brutal. He demanded perfection, long hours, and absolute discretion. Maya thrived. The work ethic she had forged, pushing a mop, translated perfectly to dissecting complex financial portfolios. Within 4 months, she had caught a discrepancy in a commercial lease that saved the trust $40,000. She was paying her debt down, dollar by agonizing dollar, and she wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor. Derek, meanwhile, had found his own new normal. He had pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence and was currently residing in a federal correctional institution in Florida. Maya received exactly 1 letter from him, written on cheap prison paper. She had brought it to my office. I had moved my operations back to a proper executive suite, though I still kept the Decatur apartment as a reminder. "He says he's found God," Maya had told me, holding the unopened envelope by the corner as if it were a dead rat. "He says he's working on a memoir about the pitfalls of the Silicon Valley mindset, and he needs me to put a few $100s on his commissary account for research materials." "Are you going to open it?" I asked, looking up from my ledger. Maya looked at the envelope, a slight, almost pitying smile touching her lips. "No, the man who wrote this doesn't exist to me anymore. He's just a bad investment I finally wrote off." She dropped the envelope directly into the paper shredder, the buzzing of the blade serving as the final requiem for her marriage. But the most significant change wasn't in our bank accounts or our titles. It was in what we decided to do with our power. We didn't just rebuild our wealth. We weaponized it for good. Using a substantial portion of the liquid assets from Legacy Horizon, Maya and I founded the Marcus Washington Legal Defense Initiative. We hired a team of ruthless, brilliant young attorneys, supervised by Chloe, who had officially become our head of security and investigations. The foundation had one specific mission: protecting elderly citizens and vulnerable women from financial abuse. When a smooth-talking son-in-law tried to trick a widow into a reverse mortgage, our lawyers were there to freeze the assets. When a narcissistic husband tried to forge his wife's name on a ruinous loan, Chloe's team dismantled his life before he could pack his bags. We became the wolves that hunted the wolves, and we operated it all from a very special headquarters. On a bright Sunday afternoon, Maya and I drove out to the tree-lined neighborhood I had once thought I'd never see again. The developer who had bought my house from Derek had run into sudden, catastrophic zoning issues right after the sale. His permits were mysteriously revoked by the city council. The environmental impact studies were continuously delayed. Facing a massive loss on a stalled project, he was desperate to sell. Ironclad Capital had swooped in and bought the property back for pennies on the dollar. I stood on the gravel driveway, looking up at the beautiful, familiar structure. The hydrangeas needed pruning, and the paint on the trim was chipping, but it was still standing. It was still ours. Maya stood beside me, holding a clipboard with renovation plans. "The contractors are coming tomorrow," she said, checking her notes. "We're converting the first floor into the intake offices for the foundation. The upstairs will be emergency transitional housing for women escaping financial domestic abuse. They'll have a safe place to stay while our lawyers untangle their credit." "It's perfect, Maya," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the Georgia sun. "I kept the master bedroom intact for you, Mom," she added softly, looking at me. "If you want to move back in, you don't have to stay in Decatur." I looked at the porch where Marcus had proposed, the porch where I had been exiled, the porch where I had finally taken back my crown. "I think I will," I smiled. We walked up the wooden steps together. Maya went inside to measure the foyer for the new reception desk. I stayed on the porch, leaning against the wooden railing, looking out over the quiet, peaceful street. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of pine and impending rain. I placed my hand on the sturdy wooden post, the wood smooth and warm under my palm. We did it, Marcus, I thought, sending the words out into the universe, hoping they would reach wherever he was resting. I let the wolves inside. I let them bite. But I broke their teeth, and I built our daughter into a fortress. The cycle of abuse was broken. The legacy was secure. And as I listened to the sound of my daughter's strong, confident footsteps echoing inside the house, I knew that the Washington women would never be invisible again.